The search for peace is a funny thing. You spend decades in places where peace is a fragile, theoretical concept, a brief pause between explosions, and you imagine it as a destination. A quiet street, a small yard, the smell of cut grass, the sound of a distant lawnmower instead of a generator. You build this idyllic image in your mind, a sanctuary you earn through sweat and stress and time away from everyone you love. When you finally get there, you guard it with a quiet desperation, because you, more than anyone, know its value. My sanctuary was 142 Snapdragon Lane, in a meticulously planned community called Maple Creek Estates. The name itself sounded peaceful. After 22 years as a logistics officer in the Army, rising to the rank of colonel, I had managed deployments, built bases out of dust and shipping containers, and orchestrated the movement of mountains of material across hostile continents. All I wanted now was to manage a small vegetable garden and orchestrate the movement of my golden retriever, Gus, from his bed to the food bowl. I bought the house with the bulk of my savings, a modest but sturdy two-story home with a decent backyard and a mature oak tree that probably predated the entire development. It was perfect. It was the finish line. I moved in on a sunny Tuesday in April. The air was sweet, with the scent of blooming azaleas. I spent the first day unpacking the essentials, letting Gus explore every corner of his new domain. By Wednesday afternoon, I was on my front lawn, not in uniform, but in faded jeans and a threadbare t-shirt from a 10K race I'd run in Germany a decade ago. I was assembling a small, decorative windmill, the kind of harmlessly tacky lawn ornament that signifies a man has officially surrendered to suburban life. It was a gift from my sister, and its cheerful red blades felt like a flag of truce with the world. That's when I first saw her. She wasn't driving by and slowing down to offer a neighborly wave. She was marching, a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair that seemed impervious to the gentle spring breeze, was striding down the sidewalk with the determined gait of a drill sergeant inspecting the barracks. She wore a pastel pink pantsuit, and, in her hand, she clutched a clipboard like a weapon. Gus, ever the diplomat, trotted towards her with a friendly wag of his tail. "Gus, heel!" I called, not wanting to impose. The woman stopped short at the edge of my property line, her eyes scanning my house, my lawn, my very existence, with an expression of profound disapproval. Her gaze lingered on the half-assembled windmill, and her lips, thinly painted in a matching shade of pink, tightened into a perfectly straight line. "Good afternoon," I said, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Alex Renner. Just moved in." She didn't return the smile. Her eyes, a pale, chilly blue, flicked from me to the clipboard. "Carol Covington," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "President of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association." The way she said it, you'd think she was announcing her title as Supreme Allied Commander. "A pleasure to meet you," I said, wiping a bit of grease from my hands onto a rag. "It's a beautiful neighborhood. Everyone seems to take such great care of their homes." I was trying, genuinely, to start on the right foot. In the military, you learn to assess the command structure and integrate smoothly. I figured the same principle applied here. "We do," she said, her tone implying that I was already a threat to this delicate ecosystem. "We have standards. That's what maintains our property values. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs, are not suggestions. They are the law of this community." She took a half step onto my lawn, her sensible pumps sinking slightly into the turf. "I'm here to deliver your official welcome packet," she said, though the manila envelope she held out looked more like a dossier of charges than a friendly welcome. and to address the initial violations. I blinked. Violations? I've only been here a day and a half? Her eyes narrowed. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on her clipboard. First, your mailbox. I glanced at my mailbox. It was a standard black metal box on a wooden post, identical to every other one on the street. What about it? The post is painted tricorn black, she stated, as if reading from an indictment. The approved shade, as clearly stipulated in Appendix B, Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the CC&Rs, is onyx. They are visually distinct. I stared at the post. It was black. She was talking about a shade of black. For a moment, I thought it was a joke, a bit of local hazing for the new guy. Her dead serious expression told me otherwise. I see, I managed to say. The previous owner must have painted it. I'll get a can of onyx this weekend. See that you do, she said, making a sharp tick on her checklist. Second, the ornamental fixture. She gestured disdainfully towards the pieces of my sister's windmill. All lawn decorations must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Unapproved items are subject to a $50 fine per day until removed. This was absurd. I'd seen at least 3 other houses with bird baths and little statues of gnomes. It was a housewarming gift, I explained, my patience beginning to fray. I can submit it for approval. You should have done so before beginning installation, she snapped. The rules are in the packet. Ignorance is not an excuse. She made another tick. Third, your vehicle. I looked at my Ford F-150 parked squarely in my own driveway. It was a clean, well-maintained, 5-year-old truck. What's wrong with my truck? Commercial-grade vehicles are prohibited from being parked in driveways overnight. It creates an unsightly, industrial appearance. All such vehicles must be garaged. It's a standard pickup truck, not a cement mixer, I countered, the edge in my voice becoming more noticeable. Half the people in this state own a truck. It has a bed over 6 feet in length and a payload capacity exceeding 1,000 pounds, she recited, her voice a monotone drone of bureaucratic certainty. That meets the definition of light commercial vehicle under city ordinance, which we have adopted into our bylaws. Garage it, or you will be fined. She thrust the manila envelope at me. Read this, memorize it, comply with it. We have a beautiful, harmonious community here. Mr. Renner, we expect you to contribute to that harmony, not detract from it. Without another word, she turned on her heel and marched away, her pink pantsuit a receding blot of hostile color against the green lawns. I stood there, windmill pieces at my feet, the heavy envelope in my hand. Gus whined softly at my side, as if he could sense my bewilderment. I had faced down insurgents, negotiated with warlords, and navigated logistical nightmares in the middle of sandstorms. Yet, in that moment, standing on my own lawn in the perfect, peaceful suburb of my dreams, I felt a sense of dread I hadn't experienced in years. The battle for Snapdragon Lane had just begun, and I didn't even know I'd been enlisted. The first volley in Carol Covington's War of Attrition arrived by mail. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope, the kind you might expect to hold a wedding invitation. The return address was simply Maple Creek HOA, embossed in an elegant script. Inside, however, there was nothing elegant. It was a formal notice of violation, printed on heavy cardstock, detailing my transgressions with the cold precision of a legal document. Fine. Number 1, $50 unapproved lawn ornament windmill. Red-white. Continued violation subject to daily fines. Fine number 2, $25 non-compliant mailbox post-color tricorn black versus approved onyx. Fine number 3, $100 improper vehicle parking light commercial vehicle in driveway. The letter, signed with a flourish by Carol as HOA president, stated that I had 7 days to remit payment and 10 days to cure the violations. Failure to do so would result in further penalties, including interest, legal fees, and, it vaguely threatened, all other remedies available to the association. I read it twice, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping my lips. I had seen shorter, less formal paperwork for the requisition of a Black Hawk helicopter. My first instinct, born of years of dealing with intractable opposition, was to fight, to dig in, hire a lawyer, and go to war over the definition of onyx. But then I looked out my window at the peaceful street, at the oak tree in my yard. I hadn't retired to a life of legal battles over paint chips. I wanted peace. And sometimes, peace required a strategic retreat. I would comply. I would be the model resident. I would give her nothing to complain about. That weekend, I drove to the designated hardware store, a place called Paint Perfect, which the CCNRs stipulated as the sole supplier for approved exterior colors. I felt ridiculous asking the man at the counter for a quart of Maple Creek Estates approved onyx, SKU Duggar 74B9. He gave me a knowing, sympathetic look. New to the neighborhood? Huh, let me guess. Carol gotcha. Is it that obvious? I asked, sighing. She keeps us in business with this color. He chuckled, mixing the paint. Barely a difference from standard black. But she insists she can see the subtle undertones. Good luck, pal. I spent Saturday afternoon repainting a perfectly good mailbox post. I disassembled my sister's windmill and stored it in the garage, sending her an apologetic text. I even cleared out a space in the garage for my truck. A tight fit that meant I now had to squeeze past it to get to my workbench. I wrote a check for $175, enclosed it with the payment slip, and mailed it back to the HOA. I had complied. I had paid. The matter, I assumed, was closed. 2 weeks later, the second envelope arrived. This time, my heart sank before I even opened it. Fine. Number 175 Zurihours. Lawn maintenance violation. Grass height exceeding 3.5 inches. The bylaw, it helpfully quoted, required grass to be maintained between 2.5 and 3.5 inches. A random certified inspection had apparently found several blades of grass in my backyard, measuring a scandalous 3.75 inches. Fine. Number 2. 50 Zurihours. Unapproved flora. My crime this time was a small patch of clover near the back fence. Clover, apparently, was not on the list of approved ground coverings and was classified as a weed. Fine. Number 3. 100 Zurihours. Structural maintenance failure driveway. A thin, hairline crack in one of the concrete slabs of my driveway. A crack so small I had to get on my hands and knees to even see it. Was deemed a significant aesthetic and potential safety violation. I was floored. This wasn't about community standards anymore. This was targeted harassment. She was actively hunting for infractions, manufacturing them where they barely existed. I walked outside with a tape measure. Sure enough, in a few spots, the grass was a little shaggy. I hadn't mowed in 10 days. And yes, there was a patch of clover, and the crack in the driveway had probably been there for years. Individually, they were nothing. Combined, on a single notice, they were a declaration of war. Again, I debated my options. The logistics officer in me started formulating a plan of attack. I could document every other lawn, every other driveway, finding dozens of identical violations to prove selective enforcement. I could formally request the certification of the inspector who measured my grass. I could bury her in paperwork, appeals, and demands for board meetings. But the weary veteran in me just sighed. It was exhausting. I was retired. This was the exact kind of bureaucratic nonsense I had gleefully left behind. So, once again, I chose the path of least resistance. I mowed the lawn, setting the blade to exactly 3 inches. I spent 2 hours on my knees pulling out the clover patch by hand. I bought a tube of concrete filler and sealed the microscopic crack. I wrote another check, this time for $225. In my mind, I was being the bigger person. I was de-escalating. I was showing her, through meticulous compliance, that I was a good neighbor and she could move on to her next victim. What I didn't understand about bullies like Carol Covington is that compliance is not seen as a peace offering. It's seen as weakness. It's an invitation to push harder. My strategic retreat wasn't leading to peace. It was simply ceding ground for her next, more aggressive offensive. And as I dropped that second check in the mail, I had a sinking feeling that this was far from over. I was just funding her war against me. The escalation from bureaucratic harassment to physical action was subtle, almost deniable, which made it all the more insidious. It started about a month after the lawn fines. I had spent a considerable amount of time and money on my front garden bed, planting a row of peace roses, a variety known for its large, beautiful blooms of pale yellow edged with pink. They were my small rebellion, a defiant act of creation in the face of Carol's sterile regulations. I'd even submitted the proper form to the Architectural Review Committee, and since Rosa Peace was on the pre-approved list of flora, she couldn't stop me. They were thriving, and their first buds were just beginning to open. They were a source of genuine joy for me, a living symbol of the tranquility I was trying to cultivate. One Thursday morning, I walked out to get the paper and noticed the roses looked wrong. The leaves were wilted, tinged with a sickly brown at the edges. The delicate buds, which had been on the verge of opening, were shriveled and dark. My stomach twisted. We hadn't had a frost. I'd watered them correctly. I knelt down, touching a crumbling leaf. The soil around the base of the plants was ringed with a faint, white crystalline residue. Salt. Someone had poured salt on my roses, intentionally poisoning them from the roots up. There was no direct proof. It could have been a prank by some teenagers, though this neighborhood seemed far too sedate for that kind of random vandalism. It could have been an accident, though it's hard to accidentally pour a circle of salt around 6 specific rose bushes. But in my gut, I knew. This had Carol's fingerprints all over it. Metaphorically speaking, it was petty, cruel, and designed to hit me where I was most invested. It was an attack on the very peace the roses were named for. I called the non-emergency police line. An officer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, came by an hour later. He was polite, took my statement, and looked at the dead roses with a practiced air of sympathy. "Looks like salt. Yeah," he said, kicking at the dirt with his boot. "Unfortunately, without a witness or a security camera that caught someone in the act, there's not much we can do. You have any idea who might have done it?" I hesitated. "I've been having some disagreements with the HOA president, Carol Covington," I said carefully. The officer's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Yeah, we're familiar with Ms. Covington," he said, his tone flat. "We get calls out to this neighborhood a few times a year. Disputes over trash cans, parking, that kind of thing. But a disagreement is a long way from proving she came out here in the middle of the night and salted your garden." He was right, of course. An accusation without proof was just slander. He gave me a case number for my insurance company and advised me to install a security camera. As he left, I saw Carol standing on her porch across the street, watering her petunias, watching the police car drive away. She met my gaze for a moment, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips before she turned away. It was all the confirmation I needed. A week later, the second incident occurred. I had parked my truck in the driveway for a few hours, while I was unloading heavy bags of new soil and mulch for the now barren garden bed. I was in and out of the garage, never leaving it unattended for more than a few minutes. When I was finished and ready to pull the truck back into the garage for the night, I saw it a long, thin scratch running the length of the passenger side door. It wasn't deep, but it was deliberate. It followed a clean, straight line, the kind made by a key dragged with malicious intent. The rage that surged through me was hot and immediate. This was different from the fines, different even from the roses. This was a direct violation, a physical marking of my property. I felt the old instincts, the ones I'd worked so hard to suppress, bubbling up to the surface. The instinct to identify a threat and neutralize it permanently. I took a few deep breaths, forcing the feeling down. I was a civilian now. I had to operate within civilian rules. I checked the footage from the new security camera I'd installed over my garage. The angle was just wrong. It covered the driveway, but the side of the truck was obscured by the vehicle itself. You could see people walking on the sidewalk, cars driving by, but you couldn't see anyone approach the side of the truck. It was another perfect, deniable crime. The next day, as I was morosely waxing the scratch, hoping to minimize the damage, Carol walked by, walking her small, yapping poodle. "Oh, what a shame," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she peered at the scratch. "Vandalism is so rare in our lovely community. You must have upset someone." I stopped polishing and looked her straight in the eye. "I can't imagine who," I said, my voice low and cold. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, perhaps you should be more careful. It's so important to be a good neighbor. People in this community value harmony." She tugged on the poodle's leash. "And remember the rules about vehicles in the driveway. A fine will be in the mail." She walked away, leaving me there with the quiet fury and the fresh scar on my truck. The message was clear. She wasn't just enforcing the rules anymore. She was making it clear that she could, and would, inflict damage on me and my property with impunity. The fines were the official attacks. This was the covert operation, the campaign of psychological warfare. And I was beginning to realize that my strategy of compliance and de-escalation was a catastrophic failure. I wasn't avoiding a war. I was simply losing it. Having failed to dislodge me with fines and minor property damage, Carol Covington shifted her strategy. She decided that if she couldn't force me out, she would excommunicate me. Her weapon of choice was the modern suburban equivalent of the Village Stocks, the neighborhood Facebook group. The Maple Creek Estates Community Forum was a nauseatingly cheerful online space, typically filled with posts about lost cats, recommendations for plumbers, and announcements for the annual chili cook-off. Under Carol's influence, it became a platform for my public shaming. It began subtly, with passive-aggressive posts that were clearly aimed at me, but never used my name. A friendly reminder to all residents to please store vehicles in garages overnight. Trucks in driveways lower the aesthetic appeal for everyone and can impact our property values. We must all do our part. This was posted the day after she saw me unloading groceries, my truck in the driveway for a grand total of 15 minutes. The comment section filled up with supportive emojis and messages from her loyalists. So true. Carol, thanks for the reminder. Some people just don't care. Then, the posts became more personal. After I had a few friends over for a barbecue one Saturday afternoon, a quiet affair that ended well before the 10 p.m. noise ordinance, a new post appeared the next morning. Disappointed to hear about the loud, disruptive party on Snapdragon Lane last night. Let's remember that this is a community of families, not a fraternity house. Some of us have to work in the morning. Please be considerate. My barbecue was the only gathering on the street. We were playing music at a conversational level from a small Bluetooth speaker. But the post created an impression. "Oh, that was the new guy, wasn't it?" someone commented. "Such a shame." The slander was working. I started noticing a change in my neighbor's behavior. The friendly waves became hesitant, or stopped altogether. A couple who I'd had a nice chat with a few weeks prior now hurried inside when they saw me getting my mail. At the local grocery store, I saw another resident, a man named Bob from down the street, in the produce aisle. I smiled and nodded. He froze for a second, then abruptly turned his cart and sped away down another aisle, as if he'd just seen a ghost. The isolation was palpable. It was a tactic I recognized from my professional life: isolate the target, cut off their support network, make them feel like an outsider, and they become easier to break. It was demoralizing and deeply lonely. I had moved here hoping for a community, and instead, I was becoming a pariah, tried and convicted in the court of social media based on the lies of one vindictive woman. During this time, my past life kept intruding in small ways. I was on the phone one afternoon with General Miller, my old commanding officer, who was now a senior official at the Pentagon. He was calling to check in, see how retirement was treating me. "It's quiet, sir," I said, watching from my window as a neighbor pulled their blinds down as I looked in their direction. "Quiet? Eh, Renner, I find that hard to believe." He chuckled. His voice was gravelly, a voice used to commanding attention. "I seem to recall your definition of quiet involves anything less than active mortar fire. How's the distressing going?" "Let's just say I've traded geopolitical logistics for hyperlocal politics," I said wryly. "The bureaucracy can be just as fierce." "Ah, the dreaded HOA," he laughed. "Good training for navigating the Joint Chiefs. Listen, Alex, the reason I'm calling, there's some chatter. Something's spinning up in the UCOM theater, a big infrastructure redeployment project. They need someone to oversee the strategic drawdown of several key installations, someone who knows how to deconstruct a base as well as they can build one. Your name came up." My heart skipped a beat. A deployment. The thought of getting back to work, to a mission with clear objectives and tangible results, was incredibly tempting. "I'm retired, General." "This would be a short-term civilian contractor recall," he explained. 6 months, max. The pay is phenomenal, and frankly, they need you. No one can move that much metal and concrete that efficiently. Think about it. It might do you good to get away from whatever hyper-local battle you're fighting. We talked for a few more minutes, and I told him I'd consider it. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house, the silence amplifying my sense of isolation. The idea of leaving felt like both an escape and a defeat. Leaving would mean Carol wins. She'd have an empty house to levy fines against, a blank canvas for her malevolence. The final straw in the social campaign came a week later. Carol posted a security alert in the Facebook group. "All residents, please be vigilant. There has been a report of a suspicious individual seen walking around the neighborhood late at night. He is a white male, approximately 6 feet tall, with short brown hair. He seems to be paying unusual attention to people's homes. Please keep your doors locked and report any unusual activity to the police." She had just described me perfectly. The suspicious activity was my nightly walk with Gus, a habit I'd maintained for years to clear my head. Now, she had painted me as a potential criminal, a predator stalking my own neighborhood, The comments were a torrent of fear and suspicion. "Thank you for the warning. Carol, I knew there was something off about him. Has anyone called the police?" I felt a cold, hard knot of fury form in my stomach. This had crossed a line. She wasn't just isolating me anymore. She was making me a target. She was turning an entire community against me with calculated, poisonous lies. My peaceful retirement was a ruin. My sanctuary, a prison. And as I stared at the screen, at the digital mob she had incited, I knew my policy of passive compliance was over. You don't de-escalate with an enemy who is actively trying to destroy you. You start planning a counteroffensive. Having successfully poisoned the well of public opinion, Carol's next move was to legitimize her harassment by weaponizing official channels. She graduated from posting vague warnings on Facebook to making formal, baseless complaints to city and county authorities. She was attempting to use the power of the state to validate her personal vendetta, a classic power tripper's maneuver. The first visit was from a polite but weary-looking woman from City Code Enforcement. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning, a clipboard in her hand that gave me an unpleasant sense of déjà vu. "Mr. Alex Renner?" she asked. "Yes. I'm Sandra Bell with City Code Enforcement. We received an anonymous complaint about an illegal business being operated from this residence." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "A business? I'm retired. I don't operate any business." "The complaint alleges a commercial woodworking or cabinet-making operation," she said. Reading from her notes, mentions loud machinery operating at all hours, chemical smells, and commercial vehicles making frequent deliveries. It was a work of pure fiction. My woodworking was a hobby, something I did to relax. I had a table saw and a sander in the garage, tools I used maybe once or twice a week, always during reasonable daylight hours. The chemical smell was probably the wood stain I'd used on a bookshelf last month. The commercial vehicles were non-existent. "That's completely false," I said, the frustration rising in my voice. "My woodworking is a hobby. I can show you." I led her to the garage. She looked around at my modest setup, the half-finished bookshelf, a few stacks of lumber, the neatly organized tools on the wall. It was clearly a personal workshop, not a factory. "This doesn't look like a commercial operation," she admitted, a hint of apology in her tone. "It isn't," I said. "I can give you the names and contact information for my immediate neighbors. They can attest that I'm not running power tools at 3 a.m. She sighed, a sound that spoke of a long career dealing with petty, vindictive neighbors. "Honestly, Mr. Renner, 90% of these anonymous complaints are just neighborhood squabbles. We have to follow up, but unless I see a clear violation, I'm just going to close the report as unfounded. You'd be surprised how many calls we get from this specific subdivision." I knew she meant from Carol. After she left, I felt a strange mix of relief and simmering rage. I had been vindicated, but I'd still been subjected to an official investigation. I had to prove my innocence against a phantom accusation. Carol had successfully wasted my time and brought the scrutiny of a government agency to my door. It was a victory for her, another small cut in a death by 1,000 cuts. The second visit, 2 weeks later, was far more upsetting. This time, it was animal control. I was in the backyard playing fetch with Gus when a white county van pulled up. A man in a uniform got out and approached my fence. "Sir, are you the owner of this dog?" he asked, his hand resting near a catchpole on his belt. "Yes, this is Gus," I said, putting a hand on Gus's head. "Is there a problem?" "We received a complaint about a vicious and uncontrolled dog at this address," he said. "The report claims the dog has been seen roaming the neighborhood, acting aggressively, and lunging at children." My blood ran cold. Gus was a goofy, gentle-natured golden retriever whose most aggressive act was trying to lick people into submission. He was always on a leash, or in my fenced backyard. The idea that anyone could twist his sweet nature into something monstrous was appalling. "That is an absolute, categorical lie," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "He is never off-leash outside of this yard. He loves people. He wouldn't hurt a fly." Gus, as if on cue, sat down, leaned his head against my leg, and looked up at the officer with his big, brown, soulful eyes, thumping his tail against the grass. The animal control officer looked at Gus, then back at the complaint form in his hand. He knelt down. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. Gus responded by happily wagging his entire body. The officer chuckled and scratched him behind the ears. "Doesn't seem very vicious to me," he said, standing up. "The complainant was very insistent. Said she had photos." "Photos?" I asked, bewildered. "Of what?" He pulled out his phone and showed me an email. The photos were grainy, clearly taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. One showed Gus barking at a squirrel on top of the fence. Another showed him running towards the back door. They were contextless snapshots of normal dog behavior, but Carol had likely provided a narrative of viciousness to go with them. "This is insane," I breathed. "She's watching my house. She's taking pictures of my dog and twisting them into lies." The officer nodded grimly. "We have to investigate every claim, especially when kids are mentioned. But I can see what's going on here. He's a good boy." He made a few notes. "Pet Gus one more time," and left. This was a new low. She had come after my property, my reputation, and now she was coming after my dog. She was trying to have Gus taken away from me, labeled as a dangerous animal. It was an attack on the one source of uncomplicated companionship and joy I had left in this neighborhood. That evening, I sat at my desk, looking at a framed photo. It was from a few years back in Afghanistan. I was standing with my team in front of a newly constructed forward operating base, a small, functioning town we had built from nothing in the middle of a desert. I was pointing at a complex blueprint, explaining some final logistical detail. We looked exhausted, but proud. We had taken chaos and imposed order upon it. We had built something strong and lasting out of dust. Now, my own life was being methodically deconstructed by a petty tyrant with a clipboard. My peace was gone, my reputation was shot, and my home felt like an enemy outpost. The call from General Miller echoed in my mind. A 6-month deployment. A way out. But leaving felt like abandoning the field under fire. Yet, staying here, fighting this invisible, insidious war of attrition, was grinding me down. As I looked at the picture, at the man I used to be, a man who solved impossible problems, who commanded respect, who built and protected things I knew I couldn't let her win. But I was starting to realize that winning this fight might require a completely different set of tactics than I had been using. It might require me to become Colonel Renner again. Not just Alex, the quiet retiree. The final escalation. The act that pushed everything past a point of no return. Happened on a cool evening in late September. It was the culmination of all Carol's previous attacks. A direct and personal threat that made it clear her goal was not merely to make me miserable, but to utterly remove me. I had received the official recall notice from the Department of Defense. General Miller had been persuasive. The project was critical, and I was, as he put it, uniquely qualified. After the incident with animal control, the thought of a 6-month escape was too tempting to resist. It would give me a chance to reset, to be in an environment where the rules, however strict, were at least rational. I accepted the contract. My departure date was in 1 week. I spent that week preparing my house for an extended absence. I arranged for a lawn service, set up automatic payments for my utilities, and asked my sister, who lived 2 hours away, to check on the place once a month. I installed a more comprehensive security system with multiple cameras covering every angle of the property, all feeding to a cloud server I could access from anywhere in the world. I was taking every precaution. The evening before my flight, I was packing the last of my things into a duffel bag in the back of my truck. The sun had just set, and the streetlights of Maple Creek were casting a quiet, orange glow. It was a peaceful scene that was completely at odds with the turmoil I felt. Suddenly, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the twilight. "Going somewhere! Mr. Renner!" I turned. Carol was standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed, a silhouette of righteous indignation against the suburban twilight. Her poodle was at her feet, silent for once. "As a matter of fact, I am," I said, my tone even. I refused to give her the satisfaction of an emotional response. "I've been recalled for a short-term government contract. I'll be gone for about 6 months." A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. It was the most genuine expression I had ever seen from her, and it was utterly chilling. "6 months," she repeated, savoring the words. A lot can happen in 6 months. A property can become neglected, an eyesore, a liability to the community. "I've made arrangements to have it maintained," I said flatly, turning back to my bag. "Arrangements can fall through," she purred. Taking a step closer, the streetlights caught the glint in her pale eyes. "The bylaws are very clear about abandoned and neglected properties. The HOA has a responsibility to act, to protect the investments of the other homeowners. We have the authority to take necessary measures to cure violations." The threat was no longer veiled. It was hanging in the air between us, thick and suffocating. She was telling me, to my face, that she was going to use my absence to attack my home, my largest and most significant asset. "This property will not be abandoned or neglected. Carol," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that I hadn't used in years. It was the voice I used when a subordinate was about to make a fatal mistake. "And I assure you, it is protected." She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Protected by who? That little security system you had installed. We have rules about exterior modifications. You know, I'll have to check if those cameras are on the approved list." She took another step, now standing just a few feet away. She lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "You don't get it. Do you? I am the rules here. People like you. You come and go. Transients. You think you can just ignore the way things are done. But this is my community. I protect it, and I will do whatever is necessary to remove any blight." The word blight was directed at me, my house, my life. It was a declaration that my very presence was a contamination she intended to scrub clean. In that moment, her obsession was laid bare. It wasn't about the rules. It was about absolute power over her tiny fiefdom, and the xenophobic hatred of anyone who was different, anyone who didn't fit into her perfect, sterile world. She then brandished the one thing that could make her threat concrete. She held up her hand, and in it was a thick, bound document. It was a copy of the HOA CCNRs. But it looked different. It was tabbed and highlighted. "I've been going over the bylaws with the association's lawyer," she said, her voice filled with a triumphant malice. "There are articles, provisions for extreme cases, nuisance abatement, foreclosure authority. It's amazing what you can do when you have the full backing of the board and a dedicated legal team." She was threatening to take my house, while I was overseas, serving my country. She was planning to use a sham legal process to foreclose on my home. It was so audacious, so profoundly evil, that I was momentarily stunned into silence. I finally found my voice. "You do that, Carol," I said, my words cold and precise. "You go ahead and try." "Oh, I won't have to try, Mr. Renner," she said, her smile widening. "I'll succeed. Have a good trip. Don't worry about a thing here. We'll take care of everything." She turned and walked away, her confident stride the walk of a predator who has cornered its prey. I stood in my driveway, the cool night air feeling heavy and suffocating. The line had not just been crossed. It had been obliterated. This was no longer a dispute. It was a promise of annihilation. And as I closed the tailgate of my truck, I made a silent promise of my own. She had no idea who she had just threatened. She had no conception of the resources a man like me could command. She thought she was erasing a blight. She had just authorized her own demolition. The 6 months I spent in Germany were a blur of intense, focused work. I was immersed in the world. I understood a world of critical paths, supply chains, and massive, tangible objectives. I oversaw the deconstruction of 3 separate facilities, coordinating the movement of thousands of tons of equipment and hundreds of personnel across Europe. It was complex, demanding work that left little time for dwelling on my problems back home. But in the quiet moments, in my small apartment on the base late at night, the dread would creep back in. My attempts to monitor the situation at Snapdragon Lane were systematically thwarted. A week after I left, all my security cameras went offline simultaneously. The cloud service sent me a notification, "Connection lost." My calls to the lawn service company went to a disconnected number. An email to the company bounced back as undeliverable. My sister drove by as requested a month into my deployment and called me, her voice filled with confusion. "Alex, this is weird," she said. "There are no trespassing signs on your lawn, and a big sign from some company called Covington Property Management." Carol's company, of course. She had created a corporate shield for her activities. "Can you see the house?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Barely," she said. "They've put up a high-privacy fence around the whole property line. One of those ugly chain-link ones with the green slats. I can't see a thing." I asked her to call the police and report it. She did, but the local police told her it was a civil matter. The HOA, represented by Carol, had produced documents claiming the property was under their temporary management to abate severe code violations, and that the fence was a safety measure. Without a court order, the police said. Their hands were tied. The communication blackout was total. My certified letters to the HOA board were returned unopened. My lawyer sent a cease and desist, which was answered with a smug letter from the HOA's attorney, a shark named Dennis Finch, citing a dozen obscure bylaws and accusing me of abandoning my property and creating a public nuisance. Every official channel was being blocked, twisted, and used against me. Carol had built a fortress of lies and legal paperwork around my home. It was during a video conference with General Miller about the final phase of the project that I finally hit my breaking point. He noticed my distraction. "Renner, your head's not in the game," he said, his voice sharp. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Then the whole sordid story came pouring out. The fines, the harassment, the threats, and now the complete seizure of my property, while I was on a contract he had sent me on. I explained the legal stonewalling, the powerlessness I felt from thousands of miles away. He listened patiently, his expression growing harder and more grim with every detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, steepling his fingers. She's trying to use an HOA bylaw to foreclose on a service member who is away on active orders, he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Technically, it's a DoD contract, not active duty, I corrected. But the effect is the same. I'm away in service to the country. The distinction is irrelevant to me. Colonel, he said, and the use of my old rank sent a jolt through me. And it will be irrelevant to the people I'm about to call. This woman has made a grave error. She hasn't just picked a fight with a veteran. She's picked a fight with the United States military's sense of order and justice. And she's done it to one of my best officers. He leaned into his camera. You focus on finishing your mission here. Get our people and our assets home. I'll make some inquiries. Let's see how brave this HOA president is when her little legal fortress is being scrutinized by federal investigators. The final 2 months of my deployment passed with no news. I finished the project, on time and under budget. The day I boarded the transport plane back to the States, I felt a cold sense of calm. I didn't know what I was flying home to, but I knew the confrontation was coming. The plane landed at Dulles, and I drove a rental car towards Maple Creek. As I turned onto Snapdragon Lane, my heart pounded in my chest. And then I saw it. My house was gone. It wasn't just boarded up or in disrepair. It was erased. Where 142 Snapdragon Lane had stood, there was now nothing but a flat, graded lot of red clay, with straw scattered over it to prevent erosion. The oak tree, my beautiful 100-year-old oak tree, had been cut down, its massive stump the only tombstone marking the spot where my home used to be. My neighbors' houses on either side looked garish and exposed, without mine to buffer them. It was a missing tooth in the once perfect smile of the suburban street. They had actually done it. They had demolished my house. I pulled over to the curb, got out of the car, and just stared. The shock was profound. But underneath it, something else was crystallizing. A cold, diamond-hard resolve. All the anger, the frustration, the feeling of helplessness burned away, leaving behind only the pure, icy clarity of purpose. This was the ultimate violation, and it would be met with the ultimate response. I got back in my car and drove to a nearby hotel. I didn't knock on any doors or scream at anyone. The time for that was past. It was time to be Colonel Renner again. I opened my laptop, connected to the hotel Wi-Fi, and sent a single, encrypted email to General Miller. The subject line was one word: evidence. The body of the email was just as brief. She did it, requesting full support. The reply came in less than 10 minutes. Support granted. Welcome home. Colonel, it's time to restore order. The final HOA meeting of the fiscal year was being held that Friday in the Maple Creek Community Clubhouse, according to the notice board. The main agenda item was a triumphant presentation by President Carol Covington on the successful completion of the Snapdragon Lane beautification project. It was her victory lap. She had erased me and was now going to be celebrated for it. It was the perfect venue for my counteroffensive. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of phone calls and meetings, not with local police, but with the contacts General Miller provided. Serious people with serious authority from the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. We went over the reams of evidence I had collected: the letters, the photos, the fraudulent legal filings from the HOA's lawyer, and compared them with the federal statutes Carol had violated. Most notably, the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA, which offers broad protections against civil actions, including foreclosures and property seizures, for those on military service. My civilian contract, they assured me, fell squarely under its protection. On Friday evening, I put on my uniform, not my old combat fatigues, but my formal Class A dress uniform. The dark blue jacket was adorned with my service ribbons, my commendations, and, on the shoulders, the silver eagles of a full colonel. It was a suit of armor, a symbol of everything I was and everything Carol Covington had decided to challenge. I arrived at the clubhouse and slipped into a seat at the back. The room was packed with residents. Carol was at the front, standing next to a projector screen, beaming with pride. She was wearing a crisp, white pantsuit, the color of a conquering hero. "And so," she was saying, her voice ringing with self-congratulation, "by taking bold, decisive action, your board was able to remove a blighted, abandoned property that was dragging down all of our home values. We have turned a negative into a positive. An empty lot that is now ready for a responsible, community-minded new owner." A smattering of polite applause filled the room. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a picture of the empty red clay lot where my house used to be. "This," she said with a flourish, "is the picture of progress." That was my cue. I stood up and began walking down the central aisle. A murmur went through the crowd as people turned to see me. I was a ghost at my own funeral. Carol's eyes widened, her smug expression melting into a mask of pure shock. "You," she sputtered. "What are you doing here?" I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of her, between her and the screen. I turned to face the assembled homeowners. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of command, and it silenced the room instantly. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and steady. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Colonel Alex Renner, United States Army, and that blighted, abandoned property," I gestured to the screen behind me, "was my home." A collective gasp went through the audience. Carol tried to interrupt. "This man is a disgruntled former resident. He abandoned his property. I did not abandon my property, Ms. Covington," I said, turning my head to lock eyes with her. The cold fury in my gaze made her recoil. "I was away on a 6-month contract with the Department of Defense, overseeing a strategic national security project in Europe, a fact of which you were fully aware." I pulled a small remote from my pocket. "You've shown your presentation. Now, allow me to show you mine." I clicked the button. The image of the empty lot was replaced by a high-resolution satellite photo, time-stamped from 3 months ago, showing my house perfectly intact, with a large demolition vehicle parked next to it. I clicked again. A legal document appeared, the demolition order, signed by Carol. I clicked again. A bank statement, the account showing where the proceeds from the illegal estate sale of my belongings were deposited. While I was serving my country, I continued, my voice a hammer striking with every word. Ms. Covington and her complicit board members used fraudulent pretenses to declare my property abandoned. They illegally foreclosed on my home, illegally sold all of my personal possessions, including my late father's service medals, and then they illegally demolished my house. Carol's face was chalk white. "This is a lie. We had legal authority. We followed the bylaws." "The bylaw you followed," I said, turning to face her fully, "is superseded by a higher law, a federal law. It's called the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The words hung in the air. Most of the residents looked confused, but a few, veterans themselves, nodded slowly, their eyes wide. The SCRA makes it a federal crime to foreclose on or seize the property of a service member during their time of service without a specific court order, an order you never obtained, because you knew no judge would grant it. I took a step closer to her. "You didn't just break an HOA bylaw, Carol. You committed multiple, serious felonies." As if on cue, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open. 2 men in dark suits, their badges clipped to their belts, stepped inside. They were flanked by several other agents. The lead agent's voice was calm and professional. "Carol Covington, Dennis Finch," he said, his eyes scanning the front of the room where the board and their lawyer sat. "Frozen. We are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and felony violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." Panic erupted. The room was a cacophony of gasps and shouts. Carol looked from the FBI agents to me, her face a grotesque mixture of disbelief and terror. The power, the authority, the absolute certainty she had worn like a crown, had crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was speechless, horrified. As the agents moved past me, produced handcuffs, and placed her and her smirking lawyer under arrest, the reversal was absolute. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been annihilated by a force she could never have comprehended. She thought she was swatting a fly. She had just discovered she'd taken a swing at a hornet's nest. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Justice, when it finally arrived, was not a slow, grinding process, but a clean, surgical strike. Carol Covington, her lawyer, Dennis Finch, and the 3 HOA board members who had rubber-stamped her illegal crusade were all indicted on federal charges. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the testimony of a decorated Army colonel, they didn't stand a chance. The U.S. Attorney's Office made an example of them. Carol was convicted on all counts. Her smug confidence in the courtroom evaporated as the judge handed down a sentence of 10 years in a federal prison and ordered her to pay millions in restitution. Finch was disbarred and received a similar sentence for his role in engineering the fraudulent legal framework. The other board members, in exchange for their testimony, received lesser sentences, but their lives and reputations in the community were irrevocably destroyed. The Covington Property Management Company was dissolved, its assets seized. The civil suit I filed was almost an afterthought. The HOA's insurance carrier, faced with the undeniable criminal liability, settled for the maximum possible amount without ever going to court. The settlement was enough to cover the cost of rebuilding my home, replacing every single one of my possessions, and a significant sum for punitive damages. Maple Creek Estates was in shock. The residents, who had been cowed or misled by Carol, were horrified to learn the truth. The Facebook group that had been her propaganda tool was shut down. A special meeting was called. The entire corrupt board was recalled. And a new, sensible group of residents, including the sympathetic man from the hardware store, was elected to lead. Their first act was to conduct a full audit and revision of the CC&Rs. Striking out the draconian and ambiguous clauses Carol had used to terrorize people. It took almost a year, but a new house rose from the red clay lot at 142 Snapdragon Lane. It was built to my exact specifications, better and stronger than the last one. I even managed to have a mature, 30-foot oak tree transplanted into the yard, a defiant gesture against Carol's scorched earth tactics. I sit on my new porch now, Gus snoozing at my feet. The neighborhood is quieter, but it's a genuine peace this time, not the tense, enforced silence of before. Neighbors wave, and they mean it. They stop to chat, to apologize for their ignorance, to thank me. They bring me welcome baskets. A year late, the community, scarred but healing, had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of unchecked power in small places. I finally have the life I dreamed of. The quiet street, the small yard, the distant sound of a lawnmower. I found my peace, but not by avoiding a fight. I found it by finishing one.